date, June 19th. It's February 1864. 15-year-old kid from southeastern Ohio, John Sisson, enlists in the 51st Ohio Volunteer Infantry. He goes off to fight in an Atlanta campaign, goes on next year, fights at Nashville, fights at Franklin as part of the campaign against John Bell Hood. Civil War ends April 1865, but for those soldiers who enlisted in 1864 that still had 2 more years on their 3-year enlistments, these men were forced to stay in the Army. They did not get to come home, unlike a lot of folks. So the 51st Ohio Volunteer Infantry, the people who were still in the ranks, found themselves on boats headed to Texas. They would spend the next 2 years in Texas. They were part of the troops assigned to a general by the name of Gordon Granger. That name may be familiar to those of you who are familiar with today's date, because it was General Granger and his troops that enforced the freedom for African Americans living in Texas that formed what is now the holiday known as Juneteenth. And so my own ancestor, now 17 years old at the time, was one of the Union soldiers helping to enforce the regulations that eventually led us to Juneteenth. So today, I think for me is in honor of my great-grandfather, Private John Sisson, 51st Ohio Company I. Today's talk is also kind of bittersweet. This is our last meeting here, as you Nicole said. This is also our first meeting going forward without one of our longtime members. Ray Kinder passed away just a few weeks ago. Ray, as many of you may know, was a longtime supporter of the York Civil War Roundtable, as well as the Cadorus Valley Historical Society and a number of other places. Ray and I developed a very strong friendship over the years. We like to argue about whether Abraham Lincoln really got off the train at Hanover Junction. And I'm sure Ray's up there talking to Lincoln right now to find out, did he or did you not step off that train? Ray knows, I don't. But Ray was the kind of guy who obviously supported the roundtable meetings. He was quick to an opinion, always smiling. And, you know, for me, it was the words, "Oh my glory," all the time. "Oh my glory." Jim McClure just said something that's really cool. "Oh my glory." I remember that really well. So Ray, tonight, if you're looking down on us, thanks so much for everything you did. We honor you tonight. Have a good day.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Scott Rosenau. I'm one of the assistant program directors here at the Roundtable. As Nicole and Scott have mentioned, this is our last meeting here, and we will resume in September at the new location of the History Center. We are taking July and August off for a summer break, so we hope to see a big crowd together at the new location in September. At our September meeting, Scott Mingus, who just spoke to you, will be speaking about his first book that he wrote, Flames Beyond Gettysburg, about the Wrightsville campaign. In late June 1863, 2 powerful columns of Confederate troops approached the Susquehanna River in south central Pennsylvania. One, under Lieutenant General Richard Ewell, marched northeasterly from Franklin County through Carlisle, Fort Harrisburg. The other, under Major General Jubal A. Early, headed eastward through Gettysburg and York towards Wrightsville, Columbia. She covers Early's expedition as his division seized control of Gettysburg after a series of skirmishes on June 26th, and then 2 days later occupied York, the largest northern town to fall to the Confederates during the entire war. Early ransomed York for $100,000 and supplies and surrounded the town with artillery and troops. Hastily organized state militia defended the river crossing at Wrightsville against John Gordon's Georgia Brigade, then burdened the world's longest covered bridge to prevent the Confederates from passing into Lancaster County, which Jubal Early had hoped to threaten Harrisburg. That is what we look forward to when we resume in September. Tonight, we welcome Daniel Nied, as he's going to talk about a very interesting topic about the captain's watch from the CSS Hunley. Many of you have heard of the Hunley. It's the Confederate submarine. And Mr. Nied is an internationally recognized authority on manufacture and conservation and restoration of clocks and watches. And he has extensively, he has taught and lectured extensively and provided consulting services to the U.S. government and to many national publications and organizations. He's the owner and director of the York Time Institute, a school of watch and clock making, which was licensed in 2008. And he previously served as director of the School of Horology of the National Association of Watch and Clock Collectors. So we're going to now welcome Daniel Nied as he presents about the Hunley watch.
Thank you. I'm going to read just a short paragraph to start. First, that the U.S. steamer Housatonic was blown up and sunk by a rebel torpedo craft on the night of February 17th last at about 9:00 p.m. while lying at anchor in 24 feet of water off Charleston, South Carolina. That statement is part of the official findings of the Naval Court of Inquiry, March 7, 1864. This was significant because never before had a submarine been successful. There were other submarines that came earlier that were unable to do anything. This one sunk a northern ship. And they were hoping it would break the blockade that kept the South from getting any supplies. Well, it didn't. So let's take a look at some of what developed, and I'll give you the background. Would you do this? The Hunley watch, why was it important? Well, when they opened it, they found the crew was there, not in great shape. And everything that they owned was there. And the captain had a watch. He actually had a lot of stuff. He was fairly well to do. Captain Dixon, young man, younger than anybody else on his crew. But he was the guy to beat. What was important about the watch? So what was the watch? Nobody knows how the crew died. Great debate to this day. And the idea of the watch was if we could get it apart and we could see if there was still wind on it. If there was wind on it, it would indicate that it died quickly. If it had wound down, it would mean that they probably suffocated over time. So this was the big deal about the watch. Okay, how did I get sucked into this? Well, at the time, I was the director of the schools of horology in Columbia for the National Association of Watch and Clock Collectors. And they got a call from South Carolina. They have a watch. Can't figure out what it is. Well, I was the #1 expert, so they called me in. We took a look. You're going to get to see some of this. The watch was not a difficult one to identify, S.I. Tobias. The Tobias family were the largest importers of watches out of England and to the United States particularly. And we had literally thousands of them here. But the case puzzled everybody because the marks made no sense. And I had connections with, it was an English case in theory, and I had connections with the people that wrote all the textbooks on case making in England that were still alive. And lo and behold, they couldn't figure it out either. So after much research, we found out that the case itself was a counterfeit, was a fake. Which told us something. If you wanted to fake an English watch in America, where did you go? Anybody think they have an idea? What's a watch? The watch was, the movement itself was English. But the case, the marks, they looked English, but they weren't. So where would you go to fake a case? Because that was a big thing to do in those days. English watches were the thing. So America was just starting to build watches. We're now Japan. New York City, noted making watches that were not real. Of course, today there's no such thing as counterfeit stuff in New York City. But that was the big thing. Okay, raising the Hunley. Nobody believed the Hunley existed by the time it was discovered, because it had been something that was successful. The Navy believed it, but no proof. So it became a legend. Well, when they found it, of course, this is South Carolina, it was in South Carolina Bay. This was a huge thing for the South. It was tremendous. And so, having been told to identify the piece, they said, well, hey, why don't you come down? Well, I spoke to the national director, who was my boss. I said, can I go? Absolutely, she said. And I'm going to. So she went with me, and we went down, and I got to look at the watch. And that's how it started. Now we'll go over the Hunley itself later on. This is where it was discovered. This is when they raised it and showed it. Shows you where the propeller was. Now you have to remember that this thing had people sitting in a row going like this to propel it. Not the most efficient mode. Next. You can also see that it's not in great shape. And it was underwater for 136 years, salt water. And the reason it's in as good a shape is that it filled with silt very quickly. And that blocked a lot of the corrosion, which also helped with the watch slightly. Okay, this is another view of it. At one point, I was allowed to play with the submarine. I couldn't take it anywhere because I couldn't get it started.
Isn't that one they had in tank preserve
It was in a tank to stop the
from liquid?
new corrosion, but they didn't want to remove the old corrosion. So, this shows you the outline of the men in it. Now, you notice the two openings at the top. Well, the openings were 17 inches in diameter. We found only one young girl that could fit. I could not. And none of the other people at National that tried it could. And we'll go over what we did at National because we were allowed to do things because I conserved the watch. Okay. The conning tower, that's where you entered. There were two, both 17 inches. Now, I'm not a fat guy, but I don't fit into 17 inches. That shows you the crank that they used to propel. Now you have to remember that this thing was made of iron. It was not lightweight. They should have used plastics, but they didn't. And there had been, before the crew that died this time, there were 2 other crews, all of whom drowned. So I think it was a total of 24 people drowned before the last. And yet they had no trouble getting volunteers. Now, I looked at it and I was amazed at that. Because it was certain death. So unless you were very unhappily married or terminally ill, I couldn't see why you would do that. Next one. Okay, that is the case. The case is real gold. It wasn't. It topped 14, but it wasn't 50. And, but if you had any gold watch, you were fairly well to do in those days. Everybody did not have a watch or a clock for that matter. That was one of the first X-rays that was taken in the laboratory that they were using, which was Warren Lash Warren Lash paid for it and let them use it for free. The case and the chain were both real gold, so it was, the captain had bucks. There were other things that were discovered also, which he had jewelry on him, which showed that he had dollars. This is another X-ray, okay, of what the inside looks like. Now, the thing about X-rays is they show through the corrosion, they don't show it to you, you don't see it. Now, the next. That's what I've started. And I have something that we can pass around. And this is something that looks pretty much like it. So you can get an idea of what it was like to start. Now, before you do anything like this, you have to submit a plan. And this is where the politics comes. Anything that was iron or steel that you touch will vanish. It'll just disintegrate in front of your face, leave almost no trace. So you have to be able to take the watch apart in such a way that you minimize what's destroyed. A lot of people would say, well, did you get the watch running? No, we did not want to repair the watch. We didn't want to restore the watch. We wanted to conserve the watch, which means you want to stop the corrosion and get into the watch as best as you can so that you can learn what you need to learn, not to have a running timepiece. I could have made the watch over. That would not have been a difficult thing to do, but it wouldn't have answered any questions either. There are several pictures which shows you how lovely this is. It is. It's really encouraging because what you're seeing is the silt that prevented some of the rest of the deterioration which would have had occurred had it not been formed quickly. Those are the marks. Anybody in the business, like Jim? They look good, don't they, Jim? They're not though. They're thanks. And everything, the way it's numbered is good. Everything was done well. It was whoever was the faker was good at it. And this was not his first attempt. There's the chain. The chain itself is legit. It is not a rare type of chain for the time, but it was in excellent condition because gold can take salt water. So it was in really shape. And people said, well, did you clean it and polish it? No, we did not. Okay. This is showing you what the hands look like from the center shaft where they're hooked on. And you can see one hand is going straight up and the other is like so. What was the importance of that? Why? Well, we needed a starting point, so we would see now if we can determine whether there was wine or not. We might have an idea of when they died. That was not something that was left to me. This is what my instructions were. This is what we have to find out. But that's me. So you see, I really did it. There was a lot of politics in this. So people say, well, who owned it? Well, the United States Navy owned it and owns it. And they make the decision as to whether or not you work on it, he works on it, she works on it, etc. And there were people that went to the Secretary of the Navy and said, that guy's no good. He's not qualified. You need me. There was half a dozen. So that's when we all had to submit plans. And the Secretary of the Navy is not stupid. He asked the other conservators that had raised the Hunley and were now working on the submarine. Well, who should we choose? I got it. So, through all the politics, which didn't end there, there was another round. I was asked to stop, and I had to go back to Columbia and wait several months while they battled it out. Then again, I get called, says, okay, they want you back. So I got to finish. Got it. This is the mainspring barrel. That's what powers the watch. If you notice, the spring is not in beautiful condition. We're going to show you what one that looks good next to it. This side. Okay, the one on the left is the good one. The other one is the Hunley watch back. The spring being steel was shot. We did not touch it at that point. So we see that the spring itself was applying no pressure, but that doesn't mean it didn't when it was sunk. This is the back of the watch. This is a watch that's extremely similar to it. It's not cleaned. Remember that anything that is steel or iron will vanish. And I mean, if you touch it, it's gone. You won't see it. But you can read the serial number on it. We were able to identify this. It was from the 1830s. And the biases, as I said, were the biggies. So there were lots of stuff that we could get. And there were a lot of Tobiases. This one was particularly important to the United States because he was in the United States a lot. This is another X-ray. Why so many X-rays? Well, you make your plans based on the X-rays. And the conservators that I was working with, one of whom I still keep in touch with, they were all top of the line people for certain things. So they knew what they were looking at, they knew what they were doing. Next. This is another picture of the watch movement itself. If you notice, there's a gear up there with teeth, and that was steel. So I had to sit and figure out, okay, which ones am I gonna sacrifice so we can get the other ones? We'll get to that sure. This is the side view of it. And one of the things that people say, well, how come it's so shiny? The reason it's shiny is you don't pull it out of the slow water until you're ready to start. And you're ready to go. Because if you do, the corrosion starts to advance. But that's another picture of me. I was a bit younger then, so I could see better. This is a close-up. Now, as movements from England went, this was a fairly good movement, pretty expensive. But in order to take it apart, I'm going to have to sacrifice some of it. Some of those steel parts need to be touched. There's no other way to get them. But again, you see how shiny that it is still wet. That is an enlargement of a screw in the watch. Can you see the hole that's eaten through it? When you see a screw like that, that's when you'd sacrifice. And this shows the barrel in the watch. And of course, the barrel itself is brass, so it wasn't too bad. But the spring, of course, was shot, and the arbor going down the center is steel, and it's shot. This shows you one of the plates, how fancy they were done. That was all hand engraving. In those days, the cheapest commodity was labor. The materials were the money. So you'll see a lot of head work that you would not see today. That's a close-up of the gear, which is steel. Had to be considered for sacrifice. Now you can see that there's a piece removed. It had to be to get down there, so we could get to the barrel. And of course, that meant that piece is done. Now, let me give you a little background on the kind of movement this is. It's what's known as a fusee movement. The fusee is a cone-shaped device which was used to balance the power of the mainspring from full wind to the horizontal. The techniques of it are not important, but it's connected to the barrel with a steel chain. And the danger was if you touch the chain, it's gone. And we needed to see was the chain still on some of it there, was it, well, or it had gone all the way down. That's what we're looking for. So this is what I meant, to sacrifice some of the parts for it. This is the dial. It's not mint condition. But there's enough that if you notice on the far side away from me, you see white. It was a porcelain dial. And the porcelain had been eaten away by the silk, which acts as sandpaper. But there was still some there. Okay, that shows you one of the numbers that was still visible. And there wasn't much. This is a view underneath the dial. And again, everything, in order to get some of these pieces out, you're going to have to dispense with some of the screws. You think about it, this is a lot worse than doing pots and pans. Just another view of it. There were originally, my memory serves me right, there was 470 pictures taken before we did a lot. Right. This gives you a close-up, you'll notice that there is corrosion where things that just disappeared on their own, which we didn't do. You wouldn't want to reuse any of those gears. That's me again. I did that in case, I had to run for office. Okay, that is the balance. And of course, shoe holding the sacrifice that it's brass, as you can see on the one that's going around. So it itself wasn't too bad. And you see some of the hand work on it. In recent times, by the way, ladies have decided to collect them to use as earrings, and that's not a joke. Okay, that is the original barrel open. We sacrificed in order to do that. The arbor at the top. Now, one of the things I was proud of, when I submitted my proposal as to what was going to have to be sacrificed, everybody else that was applying for the job also had to. Mine was 100% correct. Nobody else was even close. This wasn't the first piece that I worked on that was buried in the ocean for a long time. I had experience. But this is the good thing. You can see the steel is still intact. But here's the comparison again. And I have actually had people say, well, don't you clean watches in ultrasonics? I said, yes. Why didn't you do that? Well, there wouldn't be anything. Your brass pieces would be less. The rest would just the same way. Okay. That is showing fusing chain. Hard to tell, but imagine a bicycle chain that's tiny. That's what it is. And these watches came before bicycles. Right. This is another view of it. You can see the cone of the fusing. Look closely. And that's the one thing we did not want to sacrifice. In order to put the plates together, they didn't use screws, they used pins. That's the sum. Two plates themselves were pin, which was good for us because the pins are brass. And so they were intact, but the shafts that held them were steel. So it wasn't so easy. Okay, the image would be, but now I've got the plates apart. I'm going to say altogether that was about a week's work. And that's all day. And it's not all day by myself. I've got all kinds of people, including the South Carolina senators and congressmen that were nice enough to pay me this. and nag and nag and nag. We'll look at some of the other things and the other visitors who are not so annoyed, but these are just close-ups showing you the different places. And again, anything there that's steel that I touched, matters. Okay, this is actually a close-up of the fusee. And there is steel in fusees and it's not in great shape. But we're going to try to figure out where the winding is. And if you've never studied one of these, it's not so easy to do. Those of us that have had experience, even if it wasn't corroding, have the ability. More close-ups of these wheels, and one of the things that people don't realize is every move you made, you had to justify. Now, the conservators knew exactly what was going on. They understood. They understood that you don't just take something and sandpaper it down and make it shiny again, things like that. But people that were politically connected, that were brought in to watch, didn't know. And it's nice that they were willing to offer their expertise for every single one. Further evidence of the lack of damage done. Okay, now it's tricky to see. Jim, can you make out? Can you see where the chain is? The theory was that if we could show that there was wine still on the watch, means that there was something catastrophic that hit fast. Otherwise, it would have run down. And in theory, that would have answered the question. We'll go over why it didn't later on. But okay, now this shows it from the side, and you can see there's chain hanging on the side out, and that there is some still wrapped around the fusee, which meant that there was still power when it ceased to function. So I was thrilled with this one because I have now solved the riddle. Little bit I know. Okay, that's the last slide. Good. Let's talk about some of the other things. What other people were sent down? Well, my boss at the NAWCC, the national director, was an anthropologist and a physicist. So she got to see the bodies. I was not shown the bodies because it's not my expertise. I have no interest in that. But she wasn't the only physical anthropologist. They had their own, 3 or 4. And then many were brought in, Princeton University is right there, and they sent in a bunch. And they had debates. Did they drown? Did they suffocate? Well, some of them said, well, the bones clearly indicated X, or clearly indicated Y. So what I showed didn't matter. Because the anthropologists said it's X or Y. But they didn't agree. I wasn't part of that. I had nothing to say about that, which was fine with me. So all of the work that was done didn't answer the question. We still don't know for sure what happened. But there was all kinds of other things that developed. One of the things that happened was during one of the debates between the politicians, who was going to get this? Which state was going to get it? Where was the museum going to be built? Who's gonna get this thing? This is a big debate. The politicians of several states were fighting with this. So I was asked to get out one day. There's going to be a meeting. You can't be here. Go play with the submarine. Leave us for the afternoon, which is the truth, I think. So I got to crawl in the submarine, which by then was pulled up so that it could be dry and studying for whatever they were doing. I was not allowed to interfere with that. That was not my expertise. So I did spend some time in the submarine. It's impressive. And I can tell you that you had to be insane to want to do that, literally. Of course, I couldn't touch anything. The crank did not crank. There was really no place to sit. But it was, you know, you're awestruck. It's an amazing feeling. It's something which I've never had the chance to feel before. But there's all kinds of things that came out of this. Let's talk about some. National Geographic did a video. There was a video done with the conservators that helped raise Hunley. And they made a movie of it. Now, this is the man, Santi, who played Captain Dixon. We know that Captain Dixon was at least 6 feet tall and blonde and blue-eyed. Now, how they come up with that, I'm not sure they did. He's about 5'11" and very dark. Now, why they picked him, I'll never know. Has anybody seen this? It stinks, doesn't it? Yeah, okay. Could be a nice guy.
Donald Sutherland is great in it.
He was good,
Yeah.
but there's no reason he wouldn't be, because we don't know who he was really, you know. With Dixon, we have quite a bit on. Now, in theory, Dixon had a girlfriend who had given him a coin. And during the Civil War, in one of the battles, he was wounded and the coin saved his life. And everybody thought that was not true. The coin was found at the bottom. This is copies, and I held the original for quite a while. And the copies are phenomenal. They're just as good, except they're not made of real gold. And when I held it, trust me, I was not alone. And I've got an honest face. 2 of them. There were books. There were several books, actually. This one is on the raising. This is on everything. And magazines where they had articles. This one is from the jewelry industry. And you thought this was going to be exciting. Now, if you notice the shirt, this is Friends of the Hunt. They gave me this for coming down twice and spending a month there. It was free, I didn't have to pay. And they gave me copies of the magazine from the Friends of the Hunley, which was used to raise money so that they could build the museum. The last I heard, it's still at the same laboratory, but they converted part of it into a museum. Is that correct? That's the
Extensive website. They have an extensive website.
Oh,
You can even read a 395-page dissertation on how they plan to raise it. It's the raising.
people may have heard of Clive Cunsler. He wrote a book too. He came, only he wasn't intrusive. He introduced himself. And he stood to the side and watched me for about 3 hours. But he didn't say, you should do this, this. A couple of the senators did. So what happened because of this besides the obvious? Well, went to the Secretary of the Navy and I said, can we take the watch and put it on display at the Museum of Columbia? And he said, no. He said, but I will do something. I will let you take the case under one condition. Whatever display you make becomes property of the US Navy when you're done showing it. And that you personally return it to me when you're done. Was agreed. So for well over a year, we had a display in Columbia which showed a full-size mock-up of Dixon and the girlfriend, whom somebody was able to prove was not really his girlfriend. I don't know how they could have done that, but this is the case. They had also, because the people that had died in the Hunley, they were, quote, Navy personnel. They got full military clearance. In one university grader, I wasn't invited to go to, so I didn't. But full military honors, which makes sense, I guess. I'm not one of those politicians, so it doesn't matter.
Where they buried? Where are they buried?
In South Carolina,
Oh,
so
yeah.
yes, but
It's on the website, Hunley.org. Tells you all about where they're buried.
but they were able to show pictures of what each one looked like. They restored their faces, which to me, see, that was impressive.
They're also buried in the same plot as the first two crews.
Yeah.
Yes, they put them all together, but they also gave them honor too.
Mhm.
And they invited all of the living relatives that they could find, which I thought was pretty impressive. So after it was certainly well over a year, but I don't know, it was maybe a year and a half, when the display was done, I called the Secretary of the Navy and he tells me, you have to call this man at, in Washington, DC, at the Navy Yard, and he's in charge of the museum. And you'll have to bring it to him. So we make an appointment. And we bring the entire display, everything that we had, down to the Navy Yard for our 9 o'clock appointment. And we pull in, and the sailor that you have to speak to said, you're not on the list, get the hell out of here. So we pull out, and right behind us is a police car. So to the side, police car following us, both behind us. And I called this man whose number we had been given. And he said, that's not possible. I just looked this morning. You're the first one. Wait there. So he came out got into the car with us. The police then took off. So they knew who it was. And we drove in. And he came out red-faced. He was furious. He said, I don't know how that sailor got into the Navy, but he can't read. And that was the truth, he couldn't read. So we brought the thing into him. Gave it to him, he signed the papers to show that we didn't steal the case. And so ended my sojourn with the Hunley Lodge. Any questions?
Again, did the serial number on the movement, that's just serial on the case?
No. Then, and it wouldn't have, because remember, they didn't sell the case and the movements together.
Yeah, but I thought the guy that counted case, he would match the number of movement, make it real.
No, because I don't think that that would have been as easy to fool. I think people would have realized that. Because they usually didn't, there were later on, if you notice, that changed. And one of the things that made that change was the American companies did that. Where they would have things together sometimes, if they didn't buy the case outside. Yes,
I understand that the submarine was sent to the Citadel, is that right? When it was raised?
yes. But it was also, then it was sent to the, it had to be conserved first, so it was at the Warren Lash Laboratory first. That's where I got to see. That was,
Where is it now?
as far as I know, this is what I understand, they created part of the Warren Lash Lab as a museum, and it's still there. It is not finished, they're still working. Nobody's touching the watch. So they're happy with that.
Could you repeat kind of what you found and what did that mean?
Okay. The idea was if the watch stopped cold, that means that water got in, right, and they drowned. If the watch had run down, it means that they were down below and they suffocated. Because getting out would have been almost impossible. So what we found was, in theory, they should have drowned. However, the anthropologists argued that, said, well, that's no guarantee. And the ones that said that they suffocated stuck to that. The ones that said that they drowned stuck to that. And they wouldn't agree. And there was no official statement at the time. I don't know if they've changed that or not.
Was there damage from the explosion that would let water in?
But it wasn't conclusive. Yes, but was that what caused it, or was it sitting on the bottom of the ship then? Which is equally possible. Nobody's knows for sure. But there's, speculation, and the speculation hasn't changed. Whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, I don't know. Not a sailor. Yes.
Couple actually that I'm curious about.
Yeah.
So typically on these full plate movements, the pallet fork is kind of slid in between like a little shelf on the exposed plate. Was the pallet fork something that had to be sacrificed in the process to get the watch movement
It
apart?
was pretty bad shape to begin with.
What's that?
Wasn't much to sacrifice. It had already corroded
Pretty well calm at that point.
And because it's pretty weak, the silt was able to do the damage, right? So,
Okay. I know that being in an iron sub, they had some issues with using a compass to navigate. Could magnetism have played any effects, do you think, in the accuracy of the watch at that time?
I doubt it,
Okay,
because you wouldn't get enough magnetism using the compass.
okay,
So you remember that Watch was here, nobody pulled it out, looked, and it kept down. The compass normally was kept where you could just look. Now, what they found, there were lots of things found. And where it was, I don't know. It wasn't there when I got in. Yes,
And wasn't there some sort of a, I don't remember, stuff I read. An issue with Dixon was some sort of a blue light, so he was.
okay, the blue light, yes. The signal was supposed to be that when they were successful at sinking the ship, they would post a blue light and then go back to shore. They posted the blue light and never made it. So that was one of the things that was used by people who didn't believe it to say it was a fake. And people who did, it was lore, and people didn't believe it ever existed in many cases. But we now know that it did, and it was successful. And it's pretty impressive that they could have done that. And remember, that wasn't the first, that was the only one that worked. They made a couple before it, which lost people also. Didn't work at all. Yeah. Yes.
Can you say something about the book by Rachel Lance in the waves? Did she have a theory that the blast more or less killed him?
There was nothing there that was anything more than speculation. You know, we had as much proof as exists. And, you know, I can't argue with the anthropologists because I have no idea what they base it on. I don't know enough about bones to say that you could tell how a body died based on the bones, but evidently there were indicators. I'm not qualified to say. I don't know. But there was nothing in that book that was, would change my mind. Did I see another hand? I missed something.
So Dan, your conclusion is the ground?
My conclusion was, that's what I was told, if that's what you found, that's what it meant. And that was by the conservators that I was working with and through. So that made sense to me. I don't know how you would be able to look and say, well, here's the bones, and the bones say they drowned, or the bones said that they suffocated. If it's just bones, I don't see how you can tell. But that's, you know, I'm not an expert. But there were several experts and they didn't agree. So I don't know. Let them battle it out. Did my job. Yes, sir.
How did this is a general question about how the gears were made and how did they end up getting exactly, it comes back to how the gears made.
How do you make the gears there?
They all gotta be just so it can.
Well, the thing is that the watch itself was very similar to a watch that we passed around. And the gears were cut on gear cutting equipment. If you'd like to see that at my school, I have equipment that went back to those times to cut gears.
Where's your school?
312 West Market Street. And I do have cards here, if anybody's interested. But if you're not sure how to find me, call Jim. Yes.
Dan, you mentioned you did work on other watches. Can you tell us a little about some of the other things you consider?
Well, I worked for the Metropolitan Museum in New York, you may have heard of them. Interesting experience. New York is built in many layers, which I didn't know when I started with. And they have catacombs that are actually part of the city where they store things. And a couple of them were pieces that had been submerged. These were watches. There were also a couple of chronometers. And nobody cared. So I said, well, can I look at these? And I worked with, yeah, go ahead. So I did, and that's how I started to work out what you do with advanced corrosion. And my background is as a chemist, so I just did all the research you could. And developed techniques. And when one of the conservators, who I still keep in touch with, had also done work on corroded timepieces. But he hadn't gone as far as I did, but as far as he had gone, what I did and what he did were pretty much the same. Same conclusions. So it always helps to have somebody that agrees with you. Yes,
Was the watch reassembled to any degree for
No.
display purposes?
no. Like, one of the things people kept asking is, once you fix it. Because that's not what the idea was, it's still being available for study because it's now conserved to where it won't deteriorate any further.
Mhm.
And what they're gonna do, I don't know. They don't call me. They don't send me birthday cards, anything, nothing. Yes.
What was done with the scraps as you took them apart? You said some of it disappeared.
Oh, once it disappeared, it's not there. It's gone. It literally vaporizes. There's nothing left.
But I mean, did you say, this?
No, I did nothing. I just, all the parts that were there, that were still, they got to set up for display. Now, what their display was, that was not, that we weren't allowed to take the movement, only the keys. And that was interesting because, as I later learned from the Secretary of the Navy, that had never been done before. They had never let anybody take any Navy property and display it. We were the first ones. So I said it best. Thank God they didn't pull me into the Navy. Yes,
Why would the scientists give you such a hard time? What did you do differently? What was?
because you had people representing other people who wanted the privilege of working. So as far as the senators are concerned, well, they're just idiots. I'm being kind. The congressmen were less so, but I think that's because they didn't have the clout. I think they would have been had they had the clout. But there was enough political pressure. The Secretary of the Navy liked me, so I was all right. And he had the authority to tell them to go to hell, and did. I liked him. Yeah, he had the mouth. And he was in charge. It's his decision. Anybody else? Well, I hope you enjoyed and learned. Thank you.
Instead of what is that, side because it's really serious. Spend a lot of time on it.
I'll let you do that. Because I don't know what it is.
It's Hunley.org.
Oh, Hunley.org is the website.